Hello and welcome to this practice demonstration. Today we will take you over the functionality of PractiTest and explain to you how you can use PractiTest as part of your process. As you can see here, within Practice you have a number of modules in the system. You have a dashboard module. Whenever you enter the system, you will be placed on the dashboard and you can return to it by pressing on this PractiTest logo on the top left corner of the screen. In addition to that, you have a number of functional modules such as the requirements module, where you can manage your user stories or requirements. You have two testing modules, the test library, which is your testing repository, where you can store, manage, create, modify the test cases that you will use in as part of your process. And then once you're ready to start testing, you will use these test cases from the test library as testing blocks or building blocks within the test sets that are comprised within test sets and runs. And we will talk about this functionality a little bit later on. Throughout your whole process, you will be finding bugs and issues, and you can either report these issues into your issues module within PractiTest, or notice also that you can integrate with a number of different bug tracking systems such as Jira, Bugzilla, Pivotal Tracker, and more. In addition to these functional modules, you also have a reportings module in here. You have great search capabilities that you have in here, as well as a number of different settings and customizations that you can actually work on, and I will talk about them towards the end of this presentation. What I want to do right now is to take you over an end-to-end run of the system, and for that I will start from our requirements module. Remember, regardless if you're working with requirements or with user stories, the functionality is more or less the same. Let's take a look into one of our requirements in order, first of all, to see the requirement, but also to understand how the different entities in practice looks like. Every entity in the system, regardless if it's a requirement, a test case, or an issue, will have a name field here, description field in here, and a number of additional fields that you can have under the description as well as on the right side of the description. These fields are called system and custom fields, and the idea of these fields is to help you to tag or to catalog what your entities are about. For example, within this demo project that I'm working on, I added a field for my components and subcomponents where I can define that each one of my requirements actually refers to a specific component and subcomponent within my application. Now, in addition to these fields, every entity will have attachments, obviously, comments, a history tab with an audit trail of everything that has been happening on your entities, who has been doing any change, when and what the change was, and all additional functionality that you will find useful as part of your process. In addition to that, we also have a tab for traceability. And to take a minute, I want to explain the concept of traceability. One of the main parts of the more functional parts of the system is that you are going to be able to see how all the different aspects of your testing process actually fit together. Your requirements are going to be covered by test cases in the test library. As I mentioned before, these test cases will be run multiple times in multiple test sets, maybe for different versions or for the same version on different platforms that you're testing. And throughout the whole process, you will obviously be reporting issues. Regardless if these issues are reported within practice or outside of it, you still want to be able to see all the links between the different parts of this process that I just mentioned. And this is what you will be able to do in the traceability tab within your entities. If you notice here, we're on requirement number 6, login and validation in my imaginary application. And I can see that this requirement is being covered by 2 of my test cases, valid login and invalid login. These test cases reside on my test library. I can also see that the latest status of these tests is that test number 1 passed and test number 2 failed. Because I can see that test 1 passed and test 2 failed, then because one of my test cases is failing, Practice will automatically calculate the status of my requirement here as failed. And again, it's not only about seeing this information, but about providing you more information based on the data that we already have. As you can see, then you can just look into the status of your requirements and get a better idea and understanding of what's going on in your project. Now, moving forwards on this presentation, I want to go over to our testing modules, and I want to start from the test library. As I mentioned before, the idea is that you will create and manage your test cases as building blocks or testing blocks within the test library, and then generate test sets within the test sets and runs module in here. Starting from the test library and taking a look into one of our test cases in here as an example, then we can see that every test case will have, as we saw in the requirements, the name field, description, all the different custom and system fields in here. You can see that for every entity, we will have different types and numbers of fields based on the requirements. And again, everything here is fully customizable. You can choose what fields to add and which fields to take out. And the rest of the stuff like attachments, comments, history, and traceability, it's similar to what we saw in the requirements. If we look into our steps tab, we will see the steps of our test case, and these are actually the heart of our test case in here. This is how a step will look like in PractiTest, where every step can have a name field here, description field in here, and this is the expected results field for this step. In addition to the fields, you can also add attachments, and these attachments will be shown on runtime to your testers. And the idea is that if you want your testers to have access to how the application should look like on the different iPhone device versus Android or web system, you will be able to do it. Or also, you may want to provide them with data, like valid social security numbers and invalid credit cards for them to test the system. All of that you can add as attachments, and that way it will be handed to your testers when they're actually testing the system. The fields are optional, so if your process does not want to go very deep into adding a lot of description and expected results, you can leave it on the level of the step names. But again, it's up to you to define how deep or shallow do you want your tests actually to go into. Now, you can have as many steps as you want. You can add steps at the top, in the middle, at the bottom of your test cases. You can even call steps from other test cases if you want to reuse those steps that you already created previously. But again, there's a lot of additional functionality that you can explore within the system. Once we have our test cases written, or at least enough of our test cases written, we want to go ahead and execute them. And for that, we'll go over to our test sets and runs. What I can see here, these are 4 of my test sets. A test set is a group of test cases that I want to run together for any given reason. It can be all the test cases that refer to a specific feature in my product that I want to test in the sprint. It can be all of my regression that I want to assign to my team in order for them to be run. And you can obviously group them based on versions or sprints or functionality, whatever you want to do. You can see, for example, that in this test set, the overall status of my set is failed. But if I hover on top of the run status bar, then I will see that within the test set, I have 1 test that is blocked, 1 that is failed, and 2 that are passed. So we want to provide as much information as we can from all levels of the system. I can go into my test set here, and I can see, again, information about my test set. Here below, I can see the actual test instances. And remember, these are instances of the test cases that appear on my test library, and I have them in here. And I can see that this one failed in here, so I can go into it. I can see that the test was run by who, when, and what happened. I can even see the bugs that were reported from it. And if I go deeper into it, then I can see the actual steps that were run, where my first step passed, my second step failed, and I can see the actual results reported by my tester, as well as the bug that was reported here. Now, let me show you how you can add an additional test into your test set and then run it. If I go back into my test set here, and I want to add another test into my test instance grid here, I just press here and add test to test set. I can select either one or a number of my test sets in order to be added into my set. And then I simply add it in here. If I want to run my test, I press here on the run button. And as a tester, I'm going to be taken to this screen here when I can see the steps that I need to run. And again, remember, this is one of the steps that I need to run, where I have the name field here, description field here, expected results, actual results, and the actions in here. Let's assume for a second that my first step passed, log into the system. I went to my application and it passed, so I'm going to set it here to pass. Let's say that my second step also passed. But let's assume for a second that as I was going over my third step, create a new user on my imaginary system, I actually stumbled into a bug. What I want to do, I want to start by going over to my actual results and log in what happened. Let's say that what I got was an exception 500 when accessing the module. Now, I have a couple of options. I can either fail my step, continue testing, maybe return later on to report the bug, or I can report the bug directly from within my step in order to save time and to make it better by adding that information directly, not forgetting anything that happened up to now. For that, we have here this link called Fail an Issue that will help me to report a bug directly from within my test. Notice that as I press here, the system takes me from the test sets and runs where I was over to my issues module, and it starts reporting the bug based on the information that I gathered up to now. So the title of the bug will come from the title of the test that I was running, and I can modify it. The description of my bug will also come from the steps. Notice step 1, step 2, step 3, and even the actual results for my third step. By the way, I can use my bold here in order to make sure that my developer will notice that. Once I'm done, I can again assign it to one of my developers so that they will get an email from the system, continue filling out the information. Notice that some of the fields are already filled out, and that is because the system was able to understand, based on the information of the test case and the run, what did it belong to, like components and stuff like that. I can give it a priority, and once I'm done reporting whatever I had in here, I just press here, submit issue and continue testing, and the system will take me back over to the tests and runs, and to the step where I left, where you can see that the step has been set to failed, and the bug has been linked here directly. I can continue testing, and again, maybe set this step now to pass, and maybe this step also to pass. And once I go back to my test set, then I can see how the information has been updated in here. Now, in addition to this, remember, you have a lot of additional functionality that you can do. And we suggest that you go over to our help file on our tutorials in order to find out about this functionality. What we did right now, we went over based on the issues and we reported a new bug in here. This is the issues module where you can either report a new bug here by pressing here, or you can go back into the issues module and again, just browse over your bugs, wherever you want to go. I want to talk for a second, after having done the end-to-end run, about how do we manage information within PractiTest with the help of what we call our filter trees that you have been seeing on the left hand of your screen in all of our modules. Let's go over to our test library in order to explain how the filters work, even though they work the same way in all of our modules. If you remember, I mentioned that you can add and remove fields to your entities in order to tag them or to classify them based on any attributes that you want. If you think about it, I can tag a test case based on a number of attributes. I can, for example, say that it refers to a specific component and subcomponent within the system. But I can use other attributes, for example, to say that my test might be a regression test or a sanity test. It might be a manual test or an automatic test or even a hybrid test of both. It can be for a specific phase. It can be for a specific version. You obviously know your process, you know your projects, and so you know what tags you might be using in order to catalog your test cases. You want to use all of this information in order to help you manage your test cases, your requirements, your runs, even your issues. How do we do that? Let's say that I want to organize my test cases, and I want to start by doing this based on the modules or the components that I have in them. So if I come here, I can see that in my small project, I have some test cases for my application server, and a test case for my plugins. Let's assume for a second that I want to see only my application server test cases. For that, I can create a filter where I'm seeing only my application server test cases. Now, this may look like a folder, but it's not. We have a folder section in here that even though we have it, we don't really recommend using it. We recommend more using the filters. And the idea is that the filters are more dynamic. If I want to see only my application server test cases, then I can create a filter where I can tell the system, please go ahead and fetch all the fields where the product component, all the test cases where the product component field has the value, application server. Filters can be very simple like this one. They can be more complex, where, for example, you can bring test cases from multiple components, or you can say, out of these test cases in here, I want to see only those test cases that are failing. So I can go to another field like run status field and say, out of the list above, bring me only those tests that are failing. So they can be very simple or very complex depending on your needs. Let's take it back to the way that it was. Another thing that you can do with filters is you can create subfilters. So for example, if I want to see within my application server test cases only the entity definition test cases, then I can create a subfilter for that and see only my entity definition test cases. But the most interesting part of test cases is that of filters is that you don't need to work only with one system or with one categorization. If right now you notice that I have test cases categorized based on regressions or sanity, if I want to see only my regression test cases, then I can close this filter tree here and tell the system to bring me only my regression test cases in here. And within that, if I want, I can create subfilters for other entities or for other criteria. So basically, using your own categorizations, your own fields, you can slice and dice your data not only any way you like, but using multiple weights at the same time. And you can do the same, for example, within test sets. If you say that you want to organize your test cases based on the versions, or based on their status, or based on their types. And the same goes for issues and requirements and all the rest of the functionality in here. Now, obviously, it's not only about gathering information, it's also about how do we provide that information outside. And for that, one of the coolest things that you can see in practice is our dashboards, the dashboard that you can see here. The dashboards are fully customizable. You can modify the graphs that you're seeing, you can add additional tabs, you can add additional graphs, you can do whatever you want. In this case, let's say that I want to add a new tab in here and show some of my test case or statistics for my test cases for the first version that I'm running. So I can go here to customize dashboard. I can also come here and select the settings for my dashboard settings. It's the same thing. And if I want to add a new tab on the system, I can see here, obviously, the graphs that I already have. But if I want to add a new tab, then I can just select here. I create a new tab. I'm going to call it version 1. And now I will add one graph. I will do it quickly right now. So if I want to add a new dashboard item, I can start by selecting the entity. I can give it a name. Let's say results version 1. I select the entity in the system. In this case, I'm going to go for the instances. These are the test cases within the test sets. I select the type of graph. To do it quickly, I will go for a pie chart. And using the same mechanism we talked about, for example, the filters, I can say, hey, I want to see only filters for version 1. And I want to see the run status in the X field. I save my dashboard item. And if I come back to my dashboard, then I can see, first of all, the new tab that has been added here as version 1. And within it, I can see the new pie chart that I added. And in the same way, you can add additional pie charts, bar charts, progress graphs, whatever you want, where you're using the filters in order to define the type of data that you want to see. In addition to being able to create graphs in the dashboard, you can also generate all sorts of reports within the report center, and you can see the tutorials for that. Now, we have additional functionality in the system, and just to mention a few of them. One of the biggest challenges that we hear from our customers is how are you able to find specific test cases or specific issues or runs in the system, especially once you start having thousands and thousands of runs and test cases. For that, we have our search here. Our search is one of the most powerful tools in the system because it really helps you, it guides you on what do you want to find and detect. For example, let's say that I'm looking for a test case around my login mechanism. So I will start by typing here login. Notice that the system will give you all sorts of options for the stuff that you might be looking for. Let's say that I remember that I'm looking for something related to my valid login functionality here. You will be taken to our search area here, where you have all sorts of additional functionality in order to pinpoint your search. If you know that you're looking for a test case, for example, then you can use the advanced search or the faceted search to say, I want to filter based on type and see only my test cases here. So the search area has been lowered into that. I remember that it's a test case that it's assigned to me. So I'm going to pinpoint this in here until you're able to find the specific information that you were looking for. And again, you can obviously go ahead and use this for all the entities, for all the different types, and for all the criteria that you have in the system. Now, in addition to all this functionality, and again, there's tons and tons of additional stuff, PractiTest is a very customizable system. Just to mention a few of the things that you can customize within your PractiTest experience. You can start by customizing the email notifications that you get from the system whenever someone assigns to you an entity, or for example, if you're the manager of your testing team and you want to know whenever your test case fails, just select this flag in here and you will be notified about any test that fails, for example. And these are personal notifications, so everyone can actually define for themselves what type of notifications they can get. We have all sorts of integrations with multiple bug tracker systems, or if you're using Slack, then you can also integrate it to your Slack channels. You can even create your own integrations using webhooks, using Zapier or our APIs, especially if you're working with automation. We have a pretty good API that will help you to integrate any CI or automation framework into the system. You can obviously customize the fields that you have in the system by either customizing our system fields or adding any type of custom fields that you want. And when you want to add a custom field, you have multiple types of fields to select from. You can also, if you're working with your bugs, you can modify your workflow, or if you want to add users and modify their permissions, you can also do it from here. And no less important, it's always very, very easy to either import information if you have test cases already as spreadsheets, or bugs as spreadsheets that you want to import or take out information. It's always going to be very, very easy to do. In addition to everything that we saw today, and as I mentioned before, we do suggest that you go over to our tutorials in order to learn more about the system, or just go over to our Help Center in order to understand all the rest of the functionality within PractiTest here based on our help and support. At any time, if you have any questions, feel free just to press on this blue icon in here and you can contact our support team directly. Thank you very much, and we hope that you enjoy PractiTest.